What is up, dudes and dudettes? I am the Mystical Green Beanie. So I was playing through Arkham Knight, and I realized something very interesting about the three islands, and just the way they're set up and their placement in terms of story progression. And I've come to this theory that each island represents each major film era in Batman's quote-unquote recent history. And what I believe is that Bleak Island represents the Burton era, Miagani Island represents the Schumacher era, and the Nolan era is represented by Founders Island. Starting off with Bleak Island, I'd say that this best represents the Burton film's aesthetic in the architecture. It's heavily industrialized, yet very gothic. Bleak Island looks like it was constructed around the early 1900s, and stuff's just been added onto it ever since. Just by looking at the city layout and the structures, there's a lot of buildings with granite structures and gargoyles. Also, going back onto the industrial point that I made earlier, it looks like in order to keep the integrity of the design and not destroy what came before it, machinery's just been coiled around it over time, with there being a lot of steel pipes and huge ventilation shafts just sitting on the sides of buildings. Also, the island, very much like the Burton movies, is very small, or at least it feels like it anyways. In the wide shots of Gotham, the city appears huge, but since it was only shot on like what four stages that they built, the city feels much more intimate and smaller than it believes it's letting on. And that's why on the map, Bleak Island looks so massive, but when you're traveling through the city, it feels much more tight knit. Plus, much like the Burton films, it's bleak, hence the name. Alright, so moving on to the Miagani. I think this one speaks for itself. The transition from Bleak Island to Miagani is, it's noticeable. Much like the transition from Batman Returns into Batman Forever, this island is very colorful, with grand skyscrapers and a heavy emphasis on neon lighting. There's also statues of men holding up buildings, probably, a metaphor for the founders of Gotham bearing the base of the modern day achievements of the city, but that is an architectural metaphor that could take up a video in and of itself. So in any case, the city is heavily stylized, or at least this island is, and it resembles a hodgepodge of real-life cities such as New York, Chicago, LA, etc., etc., but put through a comic filter, as I like to call it. Also, the big difference between Bleak Island and Miagani Island, as well as Gotham in the Burton films and the Schumacher films, is that Gotham just feels bigger. And, again, much like the Schumacher films, Gotham looks not only lived in, but, as I alluded to earlier, it looks like a real city. I mean, it looks like a real place that I just haven't seen yet. But, I, I mean, I'm sure that you've heard this before in other reviews, but, you know, I've heard people say that if this was a real city, or at least if someone said this was real, you would kind of believe them, right? I mean, that's my opinion, anyways. So, lastly, Founders Island. Now, this was a little tricky because Nolan filmed Gotham in like three cities, and they're all sort of kind of different, but at the same time, Founders Island looks nothing like the Gotham that was portrayed in the Nolan films. But I still make the comparison because even though Founders Island doesn't look like Chicago or Pittsburgh or New York, it looks very much inspired by other real life cities such as Dubai, Shanghai, Tokyo, etc., etc., giving it a real world vibe. And Nolan was all about the real world when it came to his Batman trilogy. There's also the real world issue of gentrification and the displacement of mom and pop shops in favor of mega corporations because beneath all the skyscrapers, there's another, like basically another city that's holding it on its back. But again, I'm getting into tangent territory. But, anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is that uh, unlike the previous two islands, Founders carries the spirit of the franchise that it's molded after, but not actually being a visual representation of it. And also, I have this theory because just look at the way that you progress through the story and move throughout the three cities. as I said before, Bleak Island is the Burton movies. The Schumacher era is represented by Miagani, and Founders Island is the Nolan trilogy. And we started out on Bleak Island, and then you move on to Miagani Island, and then you finish the game on Founders Island. So you smell what I'm stepping in? You getting what you getting what I'm selling? All right. Anyways, yeah, that was my video for today. Just a neat little theory that I concocted in my twisted little eggnoggin. If you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel. If you want to see more videos like this, all you gotta do is subscribe. I am the Mystical Green Beanie, and as always, until next time, adios, nachos.